"It is her," the Duke of Stowcroft said, so quietly that his steward did not hear, and gripped the windowsill of the inn as though the floor of the years had tilted beneath him. "After all this time, it is her." Below, in the muddy village street, a woman in a worn cloak was helping an old man across the puddles toward the apothecary's door, laughing at something he said, steadying him with a patience Killian recognized in his very bones. He had searched 7 years for that laugh. He had ridden through a dozen counties and questioned innkeepers and curates and carters, knowing only a voice in the dark and a kindness no one else had shown him, and now, on a grey afternoon in a village he had stopped at by mere chance, the long search had ended at a window. His hands would not be still. He, who was feared from one end of the shire to the other for his cold composure, stood trembling like a boy. He had been 21 the night of the storm, and a fool, and lost. He had ridden out against all advice to reach his dying father a half-day's ride distant, and the storm had caught him on the high moor, and his horse had gone lame, and the cold had come into him so deep that he had stopped somewhere in the howling dark, being able to feel his own hands. He had no memory of falling. He remembered only, afterward, a light, a single window light burning gold through the driving rain, and dragging himself toward it on his knees, and a door opening, and a girl's startled face. She could not have been more than 15. She had taken one look at the half-frozen wreck on her doorstep, a stranger, a man alone in the night, and where another would have barred the door in fear she had hauled him in by the collar, with all the strength in her thin arms, and shut the storm out behind him. She had built the fire to a roar. She had stripped off his soaked coat and wrapped him in every blanket the poor cottage owned. She had chafed his dead hands between her own until the feeling came screaming back into them, and when he could not hold a cup she had held it for him, spooning hot broth past his blue lips with a fierce gentle insistence, telling him all the while, in a low steady voice, that he was not going to die in her kitchen and might as well stop trying. He had not told her his name. He had been past speech for most of it, and by the grey dawn, when the storm broke and his father's man found him at last by following his lamed horse's tracks, there had been only time for the girl to press a parcel of bread into his hands and a hot brick wrapped in flannel under his arm for the cold ride home. He remembered turning in the saddle to call back his thanks, his name, anything, and the rain taking the words, and the cottage already small behind him on the great empty moor, and a thin figure at the door lifting one hand. He had thought, in the muddle of his exhaustion and his father's death 2 days later, that he would surely find her again. He had thought a man does not forget where he was saved. But the moor was vast and the storm had stolen his bearings, and when he went back, weeks later, recovered and resolved, he could not find the cottage. He could not find the lane. The few he asked knew nothing of a girl who took in strangers in storms. The years closed over it. His father's death made him master of Stowcroft at 21, and the great weight of the dukedom came down on his shoulders, and he became, by slow degrees, the cold and exacting man the county knew, and through all of it, beneath all of it, he carried a single warm coal that would not go out, the memory of a thin girl's hands chafing the death out of his, and a voice in the dark saying he was not going to die. He had never told a soul. It was the one secret of his guarded life. He had searched in silence year upon year, never quite able to explain even to himself why a duke who might have any bride in England spent his rare free days riding lonely lanes, asking after a cottage no one remembered. He kept one token to know her by, had he ever found her, for she had, in the grey dawn, in pressing the bread into his hands, also pressed upon him by accident a small thing of her own, a child's wooden whistle on a leather thong, worn smooth, that had slipped from her apron pocket into the parcel. He had carried it 7 years against his heart. He did not fully know what he meant to do if he found her. He knew only that he could not stop looking. And now, below his window, she crossed a muddy street with the same patient hands. He went down. He did not send his steward. He went himself bareheaded into the drizzle and waited outside the apothecary's door until she came out, and when she did he found he could not speak at all. She was grown, a woman now, 22 perhaps. The thinness of the girl filled out into a quiet strength, her face weathered a little by years of work, but lovely with the same steadiness he had never forgotten. She glanced at him, this tall stranger in fine clothes blocking the apothecary's step, and her brow drew faintly, the way one frowns at a thing half remembered, and then she looked away and would have passed, a duke being no business of a working woman's, and the 7 years would have closed over the moment as the moor had closed over the cottage. "Lucasta," he said. She stopped. She turned. She had not given him her name. That night he had been too far gone to ask it, and he had not learned it until 10 minutes ago, from the apothecary's boy. But it was not his knowing her name that froze her in the street. It was, he saw, something in his face, or his voice, some echo across 7 years, and her own face changed, the half-frown deepening into searching, her eyes moving over him as though groping in the dark of memory for a light. "Sir," she said slowly, "have we—" "You will not remember me." His voice was unsteady. He let it be. "There is no reason you should. It was a long time ago, and a foul night, and I was not much to look at, less than I am now, and half dead besides. But I have remembered you every day of 7 years, and I have looked for you nearly as long, and I find I do not know how to begin saying what I came to say, so I will only hear." He drew the wooden whistle from inside his coat, where it had ridden against his heart through 1,000 cold mornings, and held it out on his open palm, the worn leather thong trailing. "This is yours. It fell into the bread you gave me. I have kept it. I had nothing else of you to keep." She looked at the small worn whistle on the palm of the feared Duke of Stowcroft, and the colour went out of her face and then flooded back into it, and a hand rose to her mouth. "The rider," she whispered, "in the storm, the man who you were." She could not finish. Her eyes filled. "You lived. I never knew. You went off in the dawn, and I never knew if you reached wherever you were going, or if the cold took you on the road after all." "I used to." She gave a small broken laugh. "I used to think of it on stormy nights, the stranger, whether he lived. And it was you. It has been you walking about alive in the world all this time." "It has been me," he said, "searching for you all this time." He closed the distance between them, slowly, the whistle still on his open hand between them like an offering. "I could not find the cottage. I went back and the moor had swallowed it. I have asked in every village from here to the sea after a girl who took in a dying stranger and would not let him die. No one knew you. I had begun to think." His own voice failed him, and he mastered it. "I had begun to think I would carry this whistle to my grave and never lay it back in your hand. And here you are, in a street I rode into by chance, helping an old man across the mud. The same hands. I knew you by the hands, Lucasta, before I knew you by anything else. I would have known those hands anywhere on earth." She was weeping openly now, and laughing through it, and she did not take the whistle. Instead she reached out and closed his fingers over it, exactly as another woman had once closed a duke's fingers over a returned ring far to the south, though neither of them could know it. "Keep it," she said. "You've earned the keeping of it, if you carried it 7 years. But, sir, I don't understand. You are plainly a great man. You've fine clothes and a steward waiting yonder, and the whole street stepping out of your way. Why should a man like you spend 7 years looking for the likes of me? I gave you a fire and a bowl of broth. Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said, and the word came hard and certain. "No, they would not. I have lived 7 years among the great and the comfortable, and I have learned that almost no one would have done the same. A girl alone opened her door to a strange man in the dark and dragged him from death by main force and asked nothing, not even his name. Do you know what that is, Lucasta, to a man who has spent the years since being feared and flattered, and never once helped for his own sake? You are the single act of plain goodness in my whole life that asked nothing back. I did not search for you to repay a debt. A debt could be repaid with money, and you would be insulted, and rightly. I searched because in 7 years of every comfort a dukedom can buy I have never been as glad to be alive as I was in your kitchen, frozen and half dead, with your hands warming mine and your voice telling me I was not going to die. I wanted. He stopped. He had never said it even to himself. I wanted to find the one person who had ever made me feel that the world was kind, and I have found her. And now that I have, I find I have no intention of letting the moor swallow her a second time. The drizzle fell soft around them. Down the street the steward waited, and an old woman watched from a doorway, and Lucasta Vine stood in her worn cloak before the Duke of Stowcroft with tears on her face and the whole impossible thing settling slowly into her, that the stranger had lived, had remembered, had searched, was here. "I am no one, sir," she said at last, gently. "I keep house for my uncle. I have not a penny of my own. Whatever it is you imagine you owe me, you owe it to a 15-year-old girl who is long gone. There is only me now, and I am very ordinary." "You are the least ordinary person I have ever met," the Duke said, "and I have met a great many people, and feared none of them and admired fewer still. I do not offer you anything out of debt. I will say it plainly, because I have wasted 7 years not saying it to anyone." He drew a breath. "I have never married. They have paraded heiresses past me for a decade, and I have wanted none of them. And I never understood my own coldness until I stood in this street 10 minutes ago, and felt warm for the first time since I was 21. It was always you. It was a memory of you that ruined me for every cold and comfortable match they offered. I do not ask you to answer me today. I ask only, will you let me stay? Will you let me call, and know you grown, and court you as you deserve to be courted, not as a debt? As a man who has searched 7 years and would search 70 more, and who would think the whole of it a bargain for 1 more hour by your fire." Lucasta looked at him a long moment. Then she did the thing that decided him forever, the thing the 15-year-old girl had done in the storm. She reached out, without flinching, without ceremony, and took his cold hand in both of her warm ones, and held it, chafing it gently as though to bring the feeling back, and said, with that same low, steady insistence he had carried through 7 years of dark, "You'll catch your death, standing in the wet. Come in by the fire, sir, and we'll talk it over like sensible people." He went in by the fire, and he stayed that day and many days, and he courted her through a long, sweet autumn as a man courts the one thing he has searched a lifetime to find. He did not court her with the cold splendor the county would have expected of him. He came in plain coats and sat at her uncle's humble table and learned the names of the village folk and carried the apothecary's parcels himself. And slowly the feared Duke of Stowcroft became, in that one small place, simply Killian, the tall, quiet man who looked at Lucasta Vine as though the sun rose out of her. There was an evening he never forgot, late in that autumn, when she found him studying the worn whistle by her fire and asked him gently why he had never had it mended or replaced, why a duke who could buy 1,000 finer things had kept a child's broken trinket against his heart for 7 years. "Because it is not the whistle I kept," he told her. "It is the proof that the night was real, that once, when I was nothing and dying and worth nothing to anyone, a person chose to save me for no reason but that I needed saving. On the blackest days of the dukedom I would take it out and hold it, and remember that the world had a girl like that in it somewhere, and that was enough to go on." And Lucasta had wept, and then she had taken the whistle from his hand and hung it on a ribbon at her own breast for the rest of the evening, and he had understood that the search was truly over. In the spring he made Lucasta Vine the Duchess of Stowcroft, and the worn wooden whistle hung ever after on a ribbon by the great hearth at his estate, where any guest might see it and none might guess its worth. To the end of his days he kept one ritual. On wild nights, when the rain drove against the windows of the great house and the wind howled across the moor as it had howled the night he nearly died, the Duke of Stowcroft would find his wife wherever she was and take both her warm hands in his and hold them, and say the only thing that had ever truly needed saying between them. "You told me I was not going to die. He would murmur against the storm. You were right, my love. I had only to wait 7 years to learn what I was being kept alive for. It was you. It was always going to be you, and I thank God every wild night of my life that you opened the door.